friends, the 2025 year is now nearly in the rear view, and what a year it has been. I have gone down new and bizarre rabbit holes and had conversations with survivors, activists, and authors while lifting the veil on the doings of those with the most to hide: narcissists, sadists, conmen, and creeps. It's all been done in the quest of one thing: the truth. But while I have been unearthing bones, I have been mindful of what I have been disturbing, because I never want to re-victimize or traumatize a person who has fought tooth and nail to regain their life, which can be quite challenging because the topics that I focus on are some of the worst affronts to basic human dignity that one can imagine, and I inform myself primarily by talking to people with firsthand knowledge and experience. I am not a doctor or a psychologist or a social worker. I'm not even a true journalist by trade, so that has made me equal parts cautious and eager, which in the end I think has led me to the conversations that I've had. Today's interview is certainly no different. Patricia is a retired social worker with nearly 30 years of experience in adult social care. She has been actively involved in supporting adult survivors of childhood abuse via public speaking, organized activism, and providing one-on-one support to individual survivors, which is something that she is able to do as a lived experience trainer, advisor, and campaigner. I read her book because it didn't stop when it ended, Learning to Live Lighter with Trauma, a memoir, which has been recently re-released with beautiful color photography over the end of the summer. And by the time I got to the final page, I knew that Patricia was someone that I needed to talk to. And seriously, this book is so beautiful. Let me show you one of my favorite photos from it, which will become more meaningful to you if you end up reading the book. In therapy, oftentimes something that therapists and counselors will recommend to people whenever they are dealing with a difficult emotion or trigger is to try to mentally find a happy place. And while Patricia was going through part of her healing journey, her therapist gave her a picture of a beautiful garden with a path and a bench and told her that this was a happy place where they could meet. And I want to show you this picture because in the original book that I read first, this photo was in black and white, but now since this book has been re-released for a second edition, it's in color, and I just love it so much. Our conversation today is about her personal healing journey and recovery after a childhood of abuse and neglect, but it's also more broadly about mental health, trauma, and our society's enablement of dysfunction, the true cost, both economic and personal, of abuse, and ultimately the light at the end of the tunnel of it all. I can't think of a better person to engage in such a trauma-informed discussion with, and I think it is the perfect way to round out the year. Make sure you check out the episode description because I've linked where you can purchase a copy of Patricia's incredible book, as well as where you can access some good information about survivor-led organizations and resources. With that said, let's begin. My name is Beck Griffin. Welcome to the Deep Dive Project. Rambled enough. Why don't we just go ahead and jump right in and have you introduce yourself to my audience since they're meeting you for the first time, and just kind of give a brief summary of your book and why you chose to tell it in the way that you did.
Yeah, so thank you first for having me, Becky. It's just wonderful to have a platform for conversations like this because they're few and far between, and so thank you. So my pen name, my full name is Patricia M Wennell, and I'm a retired social worker. I had 27 years in adult social care, a profession that I was interested in from a very young age, but didn't embark on until after I'd had children and gone through a divorce. So I had a social work career, 11 years in senior management, 3 or 4 years in middle management. The rest of the time was frontline, working with all the different various conditions that adults and older people might have. And then during my period of time in social work, I embarked on therapy, and the book that I've written, because it didn't stop when it ended, that book is the story of the process of therapy that I went through. And I finished writing it in 2021. It was published in 2022. My therapy ended with Hillary, the person that I talk about in the book, in 2016. But because I journaled every therapy session in great detail and explored my feelings and thoughts about those sessions in great detail, each after each therapy session, the information for the book is so recorded in such detail in my journal that when I wanted to write the story about therapy and how it had helped me and the process that I went through, it was in honor of the little girl that I was. It was in honor of myself as the woman I was becoming through therapy. And it was also in honor of the two women, Hilary, who was my therapist, and Maggie Shadell, who was the person that developed the service that I received therapy from. And I felt that all four of those females needed to be honoured, which was a great experience to do and a very fulfilling to complete. So the wonderful thing that I love about it is that the details are in real time, even though they're written later on, because everything was dated and still is in my journal. My journal is 600 pages thick, and this book isn't talking about everything, just the most significant things of the process of therapy. And the book is centered around the poems. So in order to, I was going to publish a book of 70 odd poems or 80 odd poems, but actually what I decided to do was put the poetry in context. And before I knew it, I had 90,000 words. So it became quite a different piece of work than it was going to be. But that's the beauty and the creativity of writing.
It's an absolutely beautiful story. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again because I believe that it's true. Um, and the way that you wrote it, we talked about this previously, but I described it as kind of a stream of consciousness kind of writing. The reader is just taken from page one right into the journey with you with very little preamble or introduction or anything like that, which I think is very appropriate because I think in a lot of ways, the way the book reads mirrors your own journey as it should because it came from your own journaling and everything that you kept track of from that experience, which that's just incredible in and of itself. It's hard enough to go through a healing journey like that, especially unpacking something so incredibly heavy. But to be able to actually write about it at the same time is actually quite admirable, I think. It's something that I've never been able to do when I've been going through something difficult and I've been in therapy. I use therapy as where I dump everything and leave it. And then I try to go back into my life with the good stuff that I take with me. And I don't like reflecting on what happened even in the session in the written word like that. It's very hard for me, but you did that in such a beautiful way, and it really stands as a testament to, I think, your strength and resilience as a person.
Yeah, I think I needed more than the session of therapy to manage the emotions that
Mm,
I was feeling. And it felt like I was feeling them for the very first time in my life. Having had a reasonable childhood until I was about six, um, that, the term in the UK is good enough parenting. And I think that both my parents would have been classed until I was six as good enough parents.
mhm,
But then my mum's mental health deteriorated. And when that occurred, everything changed. She was the mainstay of the family. Our dad worked very long hours. Mum was home with us. She worked, but in between school, she worked, but she was around. And life became very different. And instead of me having the sense of self being experiencing fun, knowing what laughter and love felt like, I began to close down emotionally because of what was happening to me. The mum that I knew loved me had started to behave in a way towards me that told me that I was bad. And eventually she was telling me I was bad. And so I gradually, and then she became violent and cruel,
mhm.
with her physically and verbally cruel and very violent, and that left a lot of scars, and it left me completely frozen. if I expressed anything other than laughter, I was threatened.
Mm.
And so emotions weren't safe. Tears, if I cried at all after my mum had attacked me, she'd tell me she'd give me something to cry for. So tears weren't allowed either. And what was really interesting, it's not in this book, but it's in later therapy sessions with another therapist when I said to her about bedwetting and wetting myself during the day. And she said to me, well, you had to cry somehow. And it was a really interesting, I couldn't cry tears, but I was wetting myself. So I was letting go of pain and showing it in another way. And it just really struck me. I'd never considered that.
That's
Um,
profound. I never have either. Because that's a
yeah.
relatively common occurrence, and that's like one of the indicators amongst others that a child is being abused is sudden onset of bedwetting when that didn't
Mm.
was not like a thing in the past. I've read that in numerous articles and in the rabbit holes that I've been down. That's something that I've encountered. And so the idea, and we know that it's very difficult. It can be very difficult for children to express themselves and to alert a parent or guardian if something unsafe is happening for all different kinds of reasons, right? There's socio-cultural things that come into play with that as well. And so the idea that like it's like the body just like crying out for help, releasing in any way that it can is very, very profound.
It really is. Yeah. And so there was an outlet there. But
Mm.
other than that, I think the term for it's parentified. I looked after my mum.
Hmm.
I did everything I could to make sure that things would be so organized around her and everything would be just as she liked it so that she wouldn't lose it. And that was a survival mechanism. Uh, and so I also learned to read her and also learned to read others. So, hypervigilance was there. I was reading my mum's tone of voice,
Hmm.
body language, eyebrow, anything, movement of her head, um, anything at all that would indicate to me that she was about to lose it. And I would find things to do to amuse her and make her laugh. And as I got older, I started to miss, this is still primary, I was missing school because she was, she by that time was working in schools doing catering and was working between kind of 8 and 3, which was the school hours roughly. And I would skip school, stay at home, clean the house. And I continued doing that right up until my mum married my stepdad when I was 14. I continued skipping school and looking after the house and making everything as perfect for her as I could. Everything was geared around trying to keep myself safe and keep her well because she told me and my siblings that it was us that had made her ill, that we were little bastards. She was going to tell us when our dad got home. And when he got home, she'd scream and launch at him. And then he would hit us because she would tell him, I've told them that you're going to give them the belt. They've been little bastards. And, I mean, it was a very common thing in the 60s and early 70s for parents, mums to say, you wait till your father gets home. But this was met with a week of violence with her, and then a dad who we hadn't seen all week, then slapping us or hitting us with the belt. More my brothers were hit with a belt. My sister and I were more slapped than hit with a belt. But and that's what we faced. So being frozen and just looking after everybody after my mum and making sure she was okay was my survival. The therapy, I didn't I didn't spend an awful lot of time in therapy going into detail of all the abuse I went through as a child. Most of it was focused on what my mum did to me. But there was also the vulnerability that um, occurred from what my mother did.
Yes.
And then I was spotted, if you like, by a paedophile. And his name was Ernest, and he was absolutely brilliant at grooming, at coercion.
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting because I think those two go hand in hand, making themselves wonderful, making you dependent on them. And not only the children, but my parents, who were very young, overwhelmed, were not coping. Um, my mum had had a lot happen in her life, and dad had learning difficulties, and there was a limit to his abilities. He worked hard and he provided for us, but he wasn't good at a lot of other things in our lives, and mum was the kind of glue.
Yeah.
So when she fell apart, dad fell apart. So they
Yeah.
both had a nervous breakdown. My mum's first one was once when I was 7. Her second one was when I was 10. And although they occurred at those ages, her mental health was really suffering all those years. So they came to the head ahead when I was 7, and they came to a head when I was 10. But we lived with a very mentally unstable, very angry, violent, cruel mum who was not coping. And with dad away Monday to Friday, he wasn't there seeing a lot of it. So he didn't actually know how bad it was. And she would never have told anyone because she was raised in a very strict Victorian style of upbringing in a middle class family where it was stiff upper lip. You made your bed, you lie in it, get on with it.
Hmm.
So she couldn't, and she wouldn't have told them because my grandmother, particularly, was an incredibly successful woman, a woman who was born in 1916 but became a surveyor, was a
Wow.
partner in a surveyor's firm, and was the breadwinner. So, and brought up 3 children at the end of the 30s, beginning of the war. And my
Wow.
grandfather didn't go to war because he wasn't medically fit enough. But my gran again was the strong mainstay. So my mum's got this very strong mum who coped with so much more than my mum was coping with. And in her eyes, and how could she tell her that she wasn't coping?
Hmm.
So, and mental illness wasn't accepted. And
Hmm.
especially in the UK, people still frown on therapy. So back then it would have been impossible. The idea of therapy back then would have just not been an option. So it was very difficult. And in that context, Ernest comes along, behaves like the perfect uncle, the perfect person that young parents would be able to look to. He was around 47 and they were 23, 24 when we were all born. So they were only in their 30s when he came into our life. And he would take us off and do things, teach us to swim, take us fishing, two of us. The other two of us didn't want to go and two of us did. And so there was two of us were taken off our parents' hands and, in their view, given a great time by Ernest, who spent a lot of time not only grooming us as children, but grooming our parents to win their trust. And then, of course, was able to spend time with us
Hmm.
and eventually sexually abused us both. For a couple of years, we suffered that. So that was from about the age of 9 till he died when I was 11.
Wow.
And that was every weekend. Every weekend that he could have us, he would have us, and school holidays. Whenever he was able to not be at work, we were then vulnerable to him.
Mm.
And that was subtle and gradual, but it was horrendous and perverse. Even if it was adults, it would have been perverse the things he was doing to us. And he actually taught us how to torture him because
Hmm.
that's he was into that. So as small children, I was 9, my sibling was 12. For children of that age
You never stood a
to
chance.
know and to be taught to harm an adult until they want, we he taught us that this is how much he wanted
Hmm.
of what he taught us to do. And it was horrible. It was like I couldn't believe as a small child, like you didn't even answer an adult back, let alone inflict pain on them.
Right. You were
You
just too
know,
young to be in that. You were not supposed to be in that situation, in that environment at all. It was inappropriate at every single possible level, and being introduced to those things at such a young age is just wrong. We know like the science and the data back us up on that. It's wrong. It does so much damage to a young growing mind, because it's mature. You know, you're not supposed to encounter that kind of thing until you are older and you are able to engage with it from a independent, autonomous position where you can provide consent, or withdraw it if you so choose. When you're a child, you can't do those things, and you don't have the awareness or knowledge of the world to even be able to contextualize what's happening in the first place. And I think one of the things that comes through in your book, and I think is such a testament to it, is you really show how the bedrock for an abusive environment is laid, and how that kind of can come up, and often does come up, from a domestic situation, like in a home with, you know, intimate family members or trusted friends, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
and how that can grow from there and continue on into a person's life. Because that's something that we talk about a lot on podcasts, and the content that I make. It's something that I talk about, but to be able to see that illustrated so clearly in a narrative like your book is really, really powerful, and should be something that everyone recognizes, because as heartbreaking as it is, your experience is not rare in any way,
No.
shape, or form. So being able to recognize those early signs, being able, I mean, this is why, you know, certain groups of people are mandatory reporters, like teachers and that kind of thing. You're supposed to be trauma informed, to know how to recognize this thing. But this is something that the citizens of the earth, we need to be able to recognize and contend with ourselves. It's not enough to just trust a few individuals to do that for us and to engage with these difficult things, because it is so incredibly common. And I think the only way that anything is going to change is for the awareness to reach such a point where this sort of thing is just simply, it simply can't happen, because it thrives in the dark. It thrives in secret. It thrives under fear. These are the things that enable it to grow, and that again came through in your story.
Yeah, I think so. And in the way that the process of therapy works isn't necessarily talking a lot about the actual things that happened, although you
Exactly.
may well tell your story.
Sure.
It's more about the impact of it and what it's left you with.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of what Hilary and I spoke about. And it wasn't linear, and it was going backwards and forwards. And the issue of trust and fears of separation and abandonment, they were huge. And having read the book, you might recognize how many times I had to be reassured of the same thing. You know,
Yes.
Hillary, are you going to be there? Are you staying? Are you going to go? When's, if you go away, what if my fears were like, if she doesn't come back,
What's going to
and
happen to you?
what's going to happen to me, and how am I going to cope while she's away? Because I think quite opposite to your experience of once therapy was over, it was kind of almost in that place, and then you got on with your life outside. For me, the process just didn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
It just never stopped.
It couldn't.
I, no, and it was almost like one, I feared that therapy would be taken away from me. I wouldn't be able to keep it, that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't good enough, that I couldn't believe that I would be getting this therapy for free. Doesn't happen in the UK, despite our NHS. People don't get free therapy. They
Mm-hmm.
might get a few sessions through the GP, the doctor, but mostly anything over sort of 6 to 10 weeks you have to pay for. And long-term therapy is not available apart from in this service that I went to. And I could not believe that I was going to keep getting this service. Um, I felt selfish for having so much of it when there must be another woman waiting who needed it too. I couldn't believe that Hillary could care so much about me, and I was suspicious as to why. And and I didn't verbalize those things, but I acted them out in my anxiety about her going away.
Mm-hmm.
And and she said to me, and I'll be back the same old Hillary, and she used to say that kind of thing to me, because of that level of damage and the impact on my adult life. I mean, it continues now, but I live lighter with the trauma I'm living with. I don't live heavily with it. And all the years before therapy, all I knew was that I was very different from other people in how I perceived them to respond to things and how they seemed to be able to feel and laugh and cry and express themselves. I had no problem with anger. That was my go-to emotion. And I would laugh a bit, but not genuinely from my belly laugh. It was more, I thought my feelings rather than felt my feelings. And I couldn't have verbalized that at the time, but I just knew something was very wrong. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until having significant amount of therapy that I realized that I was living with trauma from childhood abuse. And the I think actually it's the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child at Harvard. They talk about toxic stress and they talk about the intense, prolonged activation of stress responses in the absence of a protective relationship. Um, and it can cause damage in the developing brain of the child. Well, I would never have known. I would never have understood that actually I'm carrying not just emotional scars, but I'm carrying physical,
Neurological almost.
neurological scars because I probably was about 6 when mum started to show signs, even though she became very ill at 7. I was probably about 6. That wouldn't have happened overnight. That would have been gradual, wouldn't it? So my brain's developing, and I had relationships with my mum and my dad where there was an element of them protecting me, but there was a much larger element that my mum wasn't protecting me. And in the guise of the relationship with Ernest that he built up, obviously it was a grooming relationship through grooming. It wasn't a real safe, non-abusive relationship. And so the first relationship I came across that didn't have complications and aspects of someone else wanting to take something from me for sure
Mm-hmm.
was Hillary. Because I had relationships with men, but until I met my recent partner, they weren't particularly healthy relationships.
Right.
And I gave way too much. I mean, I have given way too much in my relationship with my current partner, but we've both had therapy and we've learned a lot from each other, and we're very much more balanced with it. We're both survivors. You've met
Mm-hmm.
Pete.
I have.
Um, we're both survivors, and we carry that huge baggage, which is why we ended up going to the woman's service in the first place. It was actually well, Pete had already gone as a single person, but we went together as couple therapy
Mm-hmm.
needs and trying to work that out. But it took a lot of years of my own therapy before I could stop constantly wanting to try and make things okay for him and me back off. So those impacts, overworking, overgiving. The biggest thing for me, I feel, is that I was disconnected from my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was giving birth to my children, I knew I loved them. There was no doubt about that. I absolutely loved them and I looked after them. I did everything that kind of opposite to everything my mum did from when I was 6 onwards, I think. Everything opposite. But what I was robbed of was that real deep, soft emotion where you can feel the feeling. I knew the feeling probably intellectually. I didn't know it emotionally. I knew it wasn't normal because I saw other mums the way they were. They were like gooey with their babies, and I'd think, you know, that's not me. But actually, I'm like that with the grandchildren. I'm like that with my grand canines. Um, and I'm like it with my girls now. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to be that way. I didn't know how to feel in that way. So they were robbed of a very connected, emotional mum, and I was robbed of being connected and emotional in that way and reading them emotionally. It was like a screen. As if I could see that they seemed happy, fed, watered, had everything they needed, were clean. I loved them. We had some fun together as well. It wasn't all serious stuff. Um, I could see all of that, and then I felt they're okay. And until one of the reasons why I asked them to write a letter to me
Yes.
to tell me about the good and the difficult in their childhoods,
What a
because
brave thing to do too, by the way. And even your therapist was like, I don't know if you should do that. Uh,
yeah.
but you did it anyway, and that's
Yeah.
remarkable, I think.
Thank you. The reason that it felt so powerfully necessary for me was because when I got to 47, I think it was, my mum died.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't have spoken to her in any depth about my experiences or talked to her about her parenting of me because I wasn't ready and I wouldn't have felt confident and it wouldn't have come out well.
Hmm.
And what I didn't want to do was destroy the relationship we had developed from when she became stable and life changed at home. So from the age of sort of 14 onwards, life at home became a lot better and my mum and I grew close. But as the years went on, I was very much aware of the damage that she had caused me. And in therapy, I knew that I had a lot to work through. Had she lived and I had had the significant amount of therapy that I'd would have needed, I could have sat and talked to her about the whole situation, not in an accusatory way, but just to help her understand and to just talk to her about it. And she died. So I was never going to have the opportunity. And I know that my children were aware of I was quite strict, boundaried, structured,
Hmm.
wanted to make sure everything ran smoothly for them, complete opposite to my life as a child. And I wanted them to know that they could tell me anything and they could challenge me and they could let me know if something was difficult for them. And I wanted them to be able to do it while we had plenty of time to build on our relationship and connect in a way that was more meaningful and deep with my newfound emotional connection, which is why I wanted them to do it. But I do take on board the concerns of people about me doing that.
I mean, and it ended up working out okay, I think. I mean, from the way that I read your book, it seemed like that opened up some really productive conversations for you all, and that I think it goes towards the power of a strong therapeutic relationship with a therapist who's willing to put in that hard work. And the majority of therapists are, but getting to that point where you can trust a therapist to be that safety net for you so that you can open up and feel all of these really difficult emotions, that's really significant. And for a lot of people, it discourages people from seeking out talking therapies and other types of therapeutic counseling because it can take a long time to find a therapist who is just somebody that you really can connect with on that deeper level, and it can take a couple of times, and it's very exhausting. And when you are just trying to heal and having to go through that process over and over again where you're like basically interviewing therapists, that can really slow a person's recovery and journey down. But it's so incredibly worth it if you can stick through it and find somebody like that, and then continuously go back, even though you have all of these difficult emotions that were coming up. And I think I would love to hear you talk about that process a little bit, because that's such a like core part of your story and the book is just the feelings that were coming up, how you were dealing with them, and what your therapist was doing for you to give you the space to be able to do that, because it's significant.
Yeah, the building of the relationship, and it felt to me, well, I suppose she explained it to me as well, actually, that she was becoming the parent that a small infant would need.
Mm-hmm.
So the therapy she offered me was very, very sensitive and careful. It was as if she understood that my emotions belonged to me as a small child, and there were things that I wouldn't be able to work out for myself until I learned them, and that she would help me with that until I could do it for myself. Name my feelings. I couldn't tolerate her seeing my face in distress. Any any sign of tears or distress on my face was met by my mother as ugly snivelling, and she would smother my face. And I just couldn't tolerate anyone seeing me in tears. And so Hilary asked me if I'd like her to arrange the therapy room so that the soft chairs we sat in, she made them into a bed.
Hmm.
And I know that's a kind of common analysis thing, but the chairs in those rooms were just soft chairs. They weren't beds. She did that. She organised the room and said, would I like to bring a pillow? Would I like to bring a blanket for the little girl within me? So she enabled me to feel okay about being interested in the little girl that was within me. So therapy then started being myself laying on a bed with a pillow, and I couldn't bring a blanket for myself. It's a bit like that thing where I would go out with just a t-shirt and not a jacket, and I knew I'd be cold, but I wouldn't keep myself warm. It was that lack of ability to nurture and meet my own needs in any real way. A bit like a kid will go out without a jacket
Yeah.
and the parents are saying, you're cold. That's what I was like. It was very much that in therapy, I was going back to the child
Mm.
that I was to be nurtured in a safe relationship with a safe kind of parent figure, if you like. And so I had the bed, as she then bought me a blanket. She said, would you like me to bring a blanket for you from home? So she then bought me a blanket. And then eventually I found that I did want to buy myself a blanket. And I took ages going to shops in my local town to find the right one. And I
Hmm.
did eventually find the right one. And I still have it now and I still sleep with it now. And so then I could provide myself with a blanket and pillow. And that enabled me to feel really safe and comfortable. And that was the kind of beginning of me opening up. The very first time she put that bed together and gave me a blanket and I had a pillow, I was sitting up and she said about me not feeling safe enough to cry. And I said, I just can't. She said, why don't you try and lay down and see if you can cry that way? And the minute my head hit the pillow, the tears streamed. And I stayed in this rigid position on my back, not moving, with this cover right up here and my head encased in this beautiful pillow at the back, and cried. Didn't sob, but I did cry. Tears started to fall. And one of the other fears I had was that I would wet myself in that room. So that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
With what was said later on, I was really fearful. I would and talk to Hilary about that as well. And I said, I'm afraid I'll wet myself. And she said, so what do you think would happen if you did? And I said, well, it would be horrible. And, I would just be so embarrassed. And she said, well, we would just find you something else to wear and clean you up and call your husband and ask him to come and pick you up. And I went, oh, so like she's not going to threaten to kill me, strangle me, or put a wet sheet in my face, which is illogical because as an adult in your 40s that a therapist is not going to do that to you.
But
But that just goes to
you're so in touch with that like vulnerable place at that point. You're wide open, basically. You've
yeah,
like your chest is wide open, so very
yeah,
vulnerable.
yeah. I'm child in that room with her. Um, and so she said to me, you could just bring a spare change of clothes with you just in case.
Mhm.
And it was like, oh, yeah. So then the anxiety and the fear of wetting myself in therapy sessions just dissolved because I had clothes and she wouldn't mind it, she would be fine. And the other one was vomiting, being sick. I was convinced I was going to be sick and she just used to put a bucket beside me. She said, we can clear that up. It was like there was no reason for me not to express, which was really powerful. But the other thing she did was she extended my sessions. She doubled my face-to-face session. She gave me a telephone session each week on top of that, and text contacts and email contacts in between. And when she went on holiday, she offered me something of hers to hold as she brought some stones in, and I chose a stone of hers to hold. And she also sent me a postcard while she was away and arranged for me to contact her while she was on holiday. So she couldn't have done more. She could not have possibly have done more to help me feel safe and prove to me that I was being held in mind and that she cared and that she wasn't going to leave me and that I was safe with her. So one of the most special things that I feel happened, that because I couldn't reach the little girl within me, all I could see was an iceberg and I couldn't get beyond the iceberg to get below to reach the little girl. And that's the sketch I drew of the little girl in the corner. When I was communicating with the little girl that I was with my left hand, and I'm right-handed,
Mm-hmm.
and I was typing on my journal and just expressing my feelings in this kind of unconscious streaming way, and picked up a pencil in my left hand and sketched that picture. And I can't draw as good as that as the other bits of drawing that I've done will testify. So the little girl within me, and that was her, and there she was in that corner, and I just couldn't reach her. And we didn't focus on, getting the shovel and trying to dig for her. We didn't necessarily talk about that and keep scratching that scab.
Right.
Hillary, we would talk about related things.
Mhm.
And then one day when I think I was driving, I had this vision of opening this like an oyster shell, looked like an oyster shell. So it's got like almost like an iceberg crust on it, but
Mhm.
dark, not white. And inside was this beautiful satin and was this small child. And she was absolutely beautiful. And I looked at her and it was like, that's me. And my sign is a pearl. um, and I just looked at this, and I'm describing it to you in detail, but it was seconds.
Mhm.
And then it went, and I couldn't get it back. I was desperate to see that child again and feel those feelings of love again, and I couldn't. And I spoke to Hilary and I told her what had happened. And she said she feels safe enough to show herself to you. She'll show herself to you again.
Mhm.
And it was like, oh, okay, but I never saw her again visually like that in my mind's eye, if that's what it was. But that visual sight of her in that way, of that little me, I felt in my heart.
Mhm.
So I didn't need to see her visually anymore because I could feel her now. And that was really powerful. And that was about feeling absolutely, totally safe. And that's where a lot of the poetry came from. Me saying, what do you need, little girl? I'm here for you, little girl. But they were words and I wasn't reaching her. And it was absolute agony not to be able to feel her
It was the
until
emotion.
then. Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe part of the reason, this is pure speculation on my part, but I think maybe part of the reason why you were able to journal so successfully, one, as you say, this was happening. This was your life. You were, it was very much like all encompassing. So you needed to be able to do that. But also, kind of like we were talking about the bedwetting being like this outburst of emotion, the only way it can escape. The journaling, I think for you was also, it was your voice coming out because you couldn't get it past here yet. So you were getting it out in this way, and that facilitated this reconnection with your inner child. And your relationship with Hillary and how it developed over consecutive years, and how very slowly, piece by piece, there were kind of these little bricks that were added to your new home that you were building for yourself, that you and Hillary helped pick out together, that would help you and make the difference for you. And I think it's really important to underscore how vital that is for people who really, really need that therapy and that access to the counseling and the hard work, and people like Hillary, because I feel like in our society, there's a big disconnect from the people who want the help and the people who are like Hillary. And it's not a lack of any of those people. The bridge is lost, or we don't have one yet to really connect those people in that meaningful way. And luckily you had the woman service, which helped you and was such an incredible resource to you. But even within that, it had its limits and everything. That's something that we've talked about, and that's also, around the world, that's a problem. People don't have access to things like the women's service. And I think if it would be important, I think it'd be good if you could talk about those real barriers to accessing that care, and the impact that can have on a person who's a survivor and a victim trying to heal. Because I think that's really profound, and it cannot be stressed enough that this is an issue that we need to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, stigma is one of the things that,
Mhm.
if people say they're having therapy, there's a side eye,
Yeah.
there's a judgment.
Yeah.
And the judgment here is, what do you need that for? Um, Whereas, because it's not the cultural norm here to have therapy, it's getting more common, but it's not. So that's one of the things. And another thing is finances, because it's not provided. And few people here have got private health insurance. Mostly we rely on the NHS, but there would be a time limit to it. And a lot of support that is available is in mental health services, and you have to be of a level of having mental ill health at a level that enables you to meet the threshold to be supported by the mental health service. And most people who are functioning, holding down a job, doing all the things that they need to do in life, just really struggling with their emotions, aren't in that category. So that's also a difficulty. My thing is that it needs to be appropriate, accessible, trauma informed therapy and therapeutic services. And there are things dotted around, but most of the groups out there that are helping people with therapy are charities or community interest companies that can see people for say 12 weeks and then maybe see you on a means tested basis, and there's no guarantee that you could still be there 5 years later. And so that long-term commitment isn't there from organizations because of resources. And for individuals, I mean, I never imagined that I would need as much therapy as I needed. You know, I thought a couple of years and I'd be done,
Mm-hmm.
and fine. I had no idea what I was going to be undoing. The damage I was trying to undo or deal with. I had no idea the extent of it. And so there's also the time commitment. Mums and dads, like over in America, no doubt, are both having to work. It's very unusual now for a mum to be a full-time mum at home.
Mm-hmm.
Mums are full-time mums and they're at work. And, so it makes it more difficult time-wise. But there just isn't the resource and the support. And the woman's service is unique. It was set up with Department of Health money, and it was a project to see whether it could make positive impacts on the female patients that had experienced, they called it then historical child sexual abuse, but it's now called non-recent child sexual abuse,
Interesting.
because it's never historical. And it was in the Oxley's NHS Foundation Trust, which is commissioned by the NHS, but they also have to find their own funds. And so this project was for a short period of time to see how it went. And because it had positive outcomes, Oxley's decided to keep it going. And that was in the year 2000.
Okay.
So when I was going there, I could be referred by my GP. I didn't need to be in what they call secondary mental health services. I could be in primary services. So just going to my GP and saying, I need someone to talk to, and I've heard of the woman's service, could you refer me there, was enough. Whereas now you can still go that route, but you'll be on a very long waiting list. And it's really more for people that are taking resources from secondary mental health services. So someone like me now would probably, I don't know how long I'd wait. I wouldn't be surprised if I'd wait a year to see
Wow.
someone. Because the women's service can't do what it did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not for lack of desire. And Maggie Shadell, who was the lead clinical psychoanalytical and psychodynamic psychotherapy lead, which is her title's in the book, and it's said better than that. She set it up, and she's retired now, but she set it up and she fought for it tooth and nail.
Mm-hmm.
And when I said to her, like, I have a relative who lives in the next town that needs this service, would they have something somewhere else? She said no. And I've done some research and I can't find anything anywhere that
Wow.
is like this. And I don't know how long it will last for either, Beck, to be honest, because resources are tight, but mental health services are extremely underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written a paper arguing that it's an invest to save if the government provide therapy for adult survivors of childhood abuse, not just sexual abuse, but sexual abuse is the buzzword for everything, but
Hmm.
it's for all, other types of abuse. And I know we'll maybe talk about the adverse childhood experiences
I was going
score
to
at
ask
some
you
point.
too. Yeah, I was going to ask you too after this.
The research shows, I know I can talk, shall I talk about that now, or do you
Go,
want me
yeah,
to?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Might as well.
So the ACE, it's known as ACE, ACE, and it's a score, and it's a way of scoring the damage that childhood abuse has done. And some of the toxic stress
Hmm.
would be used as some of the evidence around, the absence of protective relationships and the impact of the development on the brain. And the score talks about different types of abuse and neglect and family dysfunction in the family. And it talks about physical, emotional, sexual abuse. It talks about physical and emotional neglect. It talks about family dysfunction. So, a parent with mental illness, an absent parent, domestic violence. It also talks about substance misuse, if a parent's been imprisoned,
Hmm.
incarcerated. So it's got this whole list, and it's 10 questions based on those categories. That if you score 4+, you're more likely to experience physical and mental health issues
Hmm.
and difficulties. And in the paper I wrote, there was some research that was completed about the impact of negative childhood experiences and the output from the adult, so that the adult's output and therefore contribution to society is less, and that their physical health is worse. This study didn't look at the mental health side, but it was the Home Office, our Home Office, published the report in 2021. And what they estimated was that the damage that's done, the cost to the society just with those two things, output and physical illness, was 10.1 billion,
Wow.
costing the country 10.1 billion. They then equated that to 89,000, nearly £90,000 a year per adult.
Wow.
And there's some other research that says that in our country, we have 11 million people that have experienced abuse in childhood, which is between 16 and 20% of our population. And I put in my calculator that £89,000 times 11 million, and I couldn't understand the figure. It was too long.
It's too big.
It's too big. Um, but obviously it's enormous. And just by changing that, like I was able to stay at work, okay? I didn't need to go off sick or not function I did have benefits when my children were welfare when my children were very young. But as soon as I qualified as a social worker, that was it. I was independent, was contributing fully, paying tax, and didn't need that support anymore.
Hmm.
I got to a point in my career where I was almost burnt out. I was exhausted. And I think that therapy had connected me to myself. So instead of being this numb person, I was in touch with my feelings and could feel that I was exhausted and that I couldn't do this anymore, which was, I would have just collapsed if not for therapy. I think I just one day would have stopped. But when I left work, I was able to live on savings until I got my private pension. So I've not cost the state anything in that.
Hmm.
But had I not had therapy in my 40s, I think I would have ended up collapsing and not understanding why, and had one of these nervous breakdown, had a complete mental breakdown that I feared my whole life having, because I feared repeating my mum's
Yeah.
experiences. I feared following that path so
Hmm.
much. And I would have cost the government a lot of money, and I would have ended up homeless because we couldn't together have paid our mortgage if one of us wasn't working,
And it's
because
not and it's not hard to take that kind of a situation and extrapolate it out and very easily see how one individual's inability to access really important critical care can trigger a cascade of negative consequences throughout that person's life and the lives of everyone around that person, to say nothing of the economic and social toll of that person not being able to be a contributing member of society. I mean, it's a major deal. And I don't know if they say this in your part of the world, but over here we often refer to the mental health situation as a mental health crisis or a mental health
Yeah,
epidemic. We have a
yeah,
mental health epidemic, and people, I think, have become desensitized because to that term, because it's been used ad nauseum at this point, and so it's lost some of its impact. But your book and everything that you're describing with the ACE score and all of this perfectly illustrates how important this kind of care is and what will happen, what could happen if somebody isn't able to access those things. I mean, you see that, I think, in the lives of your parents and in the lives of their parents, and it goes on however many generations back. And, we can have empathy and understanding and appreciate the place where they were coming from and the time in which they lived, while also holding ourselves to a higher standard and demanding more for ourselves because we deserve it. As a human race, we deserve to be able to heal, to be able to emote and interact with the world on a level that's beyond just the physical. Even if you're not a religious person, there that kind of emotional, spiritual element, if you will, is very, very important in how we like form societies and connect with each other. And I spend a lot of time thinking about trauma and what it does, not just to an individual or a family unit, but what it does to a society, to a region of the world, to a country. You can take it out and extrapolate it out that far. And I think start to see things that have happened in our world through a very different lens. And when you are a little bit more trauma informed, the things that people do, it kind of changes the way that you interact with the world and how you approach these situations. And I think it softens you a little bit too, and enables you to come into it as a human being instead of a robot who's just going to like
yeah.
march through and try to fix the issue and cut away. And, if we just lock these people up and we send people here and send people there, it'll all be better. There's more to it than that.
There's a lot more, and there's some work like Gabor Mate, and he said that trauma is a psychological wound that you sustain from the abuse that you experienced or the hurt that you experienced at the time. And he said if something reminds you of what that wound was, or someone says something that kind of touches that wound, then it's going to hurt like it did when it was still raw.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that it becomes a scar. And this is really important, I think, from what you're saying about how we see it played out in society, that it scars over, and a scar is thick. It's got no nerve endings in it. You can't feel anything, and it's not flexible. And so it doesn't grow like healthy flesh. So unless somebody really understands that the way they feel isn't normal or isn't how others feel, and just believe that how they feel is right, my kind of sense of that is, well, then maybe they can't feel, they're inflexible, they can't develop healthily, and they may well then hurt others. Because, that saying that in the survivor community, we balk really severely when people say hurt people, hurt people.
Yeah, it's tired.
Under- we understand why it's said, but something around 11% of people that have been sexually abused, maybe even under 11%, may go on to sexually abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult because when you're interviewing people for terrible crimes, they can say, well, this happened to me, and it could be true, and you wouldn't want to not believe them, but sometimes they say that for mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to know how much of it's true unless you're actually speaking to people, that in the system already that have been abused. But also the numbers are going to be a lot higher for people raised in domestic violent households, because there's a lot of data that talks about how children brought up in domestic violent households, the women will often end up with a violent husband when they grow up.
Yeah.
And one or a son, and sometimes a daughter, but more often a son will become violent towards the women in his life. So there will be a higher proportion of people, and I don't really know why that is, and it would be great to read some research. I'd like to educate myself more on that. It would be great to have some research about that. But sometimes unintentional, like I wasn't intentionally emotionally cut off when I was raising my children.
Hmm.
And I can't really believe that my mum was intentionally wanted to be violent and cruel. I think she was out of control. I don't know if she could have controlled it. I like to think she should have tried harder to control it or walk away.
Hmm.
Um, but in the family home, her behaviour was the way it was, violent and cruel. None of us, four children, have mirrored that behaviour in our lives as adults, but there are others that we know have. And even if they've not had any of those adverse experiences on the score in childhood, what it hasn't got on that list is, have they been indoctrinated with a belief of white superiority, religious
Misogyny.
indoctrination, misogyny, anything oppression,
Hmm.
that others are inferior, any of those things. Have they been indoctrinated with that? Because if they had, to me, that's also abusive.
Hmm.
And they may not, because it's been in their culture and their belief system, and they might have like-minded people around them in that family setting, it's a norm. It becomes their norm. So does that enable people to go out there and show such cruelty and believe in their own entitlement and superiority at the expense of others? I don't have the answer, but it kind of, you know,
Stands to reason.
why?
Seems, yeah, yeah. It definitely opens up a very troubling line of inquiry that I think is frustrating because we don't have all of the answers for a lot of these things. And I don't know if that is a lack of data and research, and someday we can overcome that, or if it is something about our human psyche and how we interact with the world. I don't know. Obviously, there's culturally speaking, it's a diverse world with many different cultures. And in certain cultures, certain types of behaviors are normalized, or kind of just accepted, particularly when you're talking about raising children and how children are treated and everything. Different cultures have very different perspectives on how children are supposed to be treated. But I think that, and maybe this is going to come across as culturally insensitive, but if that's the case, then so be it. I'm not intending to be. But sometimes cultures have beliefs and perspectives and ideas that are just bad, and they just need to be, they should not have a place in our society. And that doesn't mean that that culture is not valid or that a person should not feel connected to it in some way, but there are parts of it that, maybe need to be cut out, maybe need to be removed. And I think that applies to cultures, and I think it also applies to family units and the children of abusive parents or abused parents. Like how we move into the world and how we change things. I hope that by doing all of that, we will find some answers and find some solutions and figure some things out. Because, again, like we're saying, why? It's hard to understand. It's hard to understand all of the reasons why, even if you've spent a lifetime talking to people who have firsthand knowledge and have spent a lot of time researching it.
I mean, it is interesting because there's also subjects that a lot of people in the survivor community struggle with, and that's the work with perpetrators.
Yeah.
And we've accepted for a long time that if somebody is violent to their partner, they might go to prison for it, they might not, but they will probably be put onto an anger management course of some kind where they will have a therapeutic intervention to help them to understand, where does that anger come from?
Mm-hmm.
And they get that support. Now, they're a perpetrator of violence on their partner, and they could be females as well, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but they get anger management. They get this psychological, psychotherapeutic intervention to help manage their behaviour. There's a lot of fantastic work going on over in the island of Ireland, like Southern Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Northern Ireland as well, but I know more about what's happening in Southern Ireland. And they are working with young people who, there's this conversation of sibling on sibling abuse, or what's the word, exploring or curiosity or stuff like that. Well, in more recent years, they've been doing a lot of work understanding more about the harm. And so they're talking about young children and young people who are displaying harmful behaviours rather than sibling sexual abuse. They're not using that terminology. And they're doing these programs with these young people. And the positive outcomes, the results are very positive, but they're having to put resources into that. So a lot of people are saying, well, I am a survivor of childhood abuse. I can't afford therapy. Why aren't I getting any of this? Because this is, they're not having to pay for this, but, the likes of me would have to pay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of negativity around that. But the way I look at it, and there's something called circles, which works with
Yes,
people that have been
I'm familiar.
convicted. Yeah. And so then when they come out of prison, they're being held accountable to the people that are often survivors that are doing this with them. They're being held accountable to the group and the survivors or the facilitators of that don't have a history of abuse, of abusing, and they're
Mm-hmm.
being held accountable. And it kind of fits in really well with Judith Herman's Truth and Repair, the model she talks about in Truth and Repair. And it's that thing around, if we can work through behaviours and put resources into negative or harmful behaviours, whether they're physical, sexual, or whatever they are, narcissistic or whatever they are,
Mm-hmm.
then that could help. The average paedophile doesn't just abuse one child.
Right.
People in domestic violent relationships, when the partner, the spouse that's been abused, finally finds the courage to leave, they move on to their next victim. And they could go through several relationships with women that have had enough of being whacked and
Mm-hmm.
end the relationship. So that's, and if one woman doesn't speak up through a court system and get that person convicted so they've got a record, the next person that meets them, there'll be no record on that person. So, it's just a vicious circle.
It is.
Um, and so I'm a great believer in providing that kind of support and intervention to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When you've got people who believe they're right and don't think they're doing anything wrong, there are some paedophiles like that. They believe that they're minor attracted or
Yeah,
something like
minor
that. It's this
attracted people.
awful
Yes. Yeah.
terminology that's coming out now, and it's like, well, you can be as minor attracted as you like, but they're not old enough to consent, so just
Mm-hmm.
go
Mm-hmm.
and get some help with that. I don't, whatever they want to call it, it's wrong on every level, but there are people like them that actually believe that that is a normal thing, and it's to do with our culture that we've put in these laws, that
Mm-hmm.
in nature it would be different. And
I think that with any movement, with any positive movement, whether it's destigmatizing mental health care or women's rights or LGBTQ plus rights or whatever the case may be, with any kind of a positive movement, you're always going to end up with these sort of extreme factions, one way or the other, that take whatever the idea central is, which in this case we're talking about. Resources to help people who have these attractions, right? Pedophiles, we're talking about dealing with these people in our society in a more holistic way. These minor attracted people, right? I think they're an example of this sort of good intention kind of warped and gone bad. Centrally, there is something there about, and a lot of people get really upset about this, but um, changing the way that we treat people who commit really terrible crimes. There's a topic of conversation in there along with this whole trauma piece that I think is really, really important. But I think the whole map thing has like taken that and gone like the far end of the extreme with it, and it's very perverted and not valid in my opinion in any way, shape or form. But I think you see that in most any kind of like societal movement that's trying to better or improve the circumstances for a group of people. You kind of have these like factions that kind of go crazy and go bad, which is unfortunate. But I think in this situation, it underscores once again just how much of a need there is for more comprehensive care and management of these types of situations, because as much as we would all perhaps like to just lock up every single pedophile, throw away the key, chemically castrate them, and be done with the entire thing, because of the way that trauma works, and people, I get people in my comment section who get upset when I say this, but it's the truth. Because of the way that trauma works, very oftentimes the people who are doing these things are traumatized people themselves. There's an element at play there that is incredibly painful. And while we are holding people to a high standard and seeking justice for victims, I think there's another side of care that needs to be extended to the perpetrators of these crimes specifically, because I think that it indicates a fundamental there's something fundamentally disconnected within a person for them to be able to do those kinds of things, to have those kinds of feelings, to think that that's like something that they should act on. And how you incorporate that into a like kind of trauma informed program for people, where you're also not making victims feel like you're proselytizing on behalf of the perpetrators. That's a really complex subject. I don't know how much we can get into it here, but that's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I I think that things like restorative justice have got a really good place,
Mm-hmm.
and not and that to me doesn't mean it's a bit like saying forgiveness, forgive someone. I don't forgive my mum for what she did to me. I don't forgive Ernest for what he did to me. Why should
Mm-hmm.
I? I don't.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not interested in forgiving them. I did tell my mum when she was dying that I'd forgiven her for all the wrongs, but that was kind of before therapy. Post
Right.
therapy, I would have said, by the way, you're unforgiven. And it was, it's, but it isn't holding on to an anger and a bitterness. It's just saying, I don't forgive you. You need to deal with that yourself. I'm not letting you off the hook there. You,
Mm-hmm.
but and with restorative justice for me, and part of me wishing I had more time with my mum to be able to talk to her about my childhood and what it did to me and what it meant, was to have that conversation so that she could understand
Mm-hmm.
and so that I had the opportunity to have a voice. And it won't take away ever what she did, but it would give me an opportunity to have a voice instead of being silenced and in
Mm-hmm.
fear. And if Ernest was alive, I absolutely would be challenging him with everything that he did to me. Hillary said, what if he denied it? I said, I don't care. I know
Exactly.
what he did. So,
Exactly.
like, I don't care about forgiving someone. I'm not interested.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if they accept it. I don't care if they say anything other than a genuine sorry. It doesn't put that right. It doesn't take it away. But if they were
Mm-hmm.
genuinely sorry for what they did, at least that gives, it's a bit of a gift. And it did happen with me on a slightly different thing with my mum when I was being followed by journalists because of something to do with my divorce, which was absolutely horrendous. And he'd gone to the papers, and the journalist had turned up at my house. And I was getting the children ready for school. And I had a discussion with this journalist who left my house. And then I didn't know if other journalists were going to be following me around or asking me questions. And so I went into the children's school and told them, can you keep the children inside at playtime? I don't want any, I told them, and I said, look, I don't know if they're safe. And they said, yes, fine. So they dealt with that for me in the school day. And I was on my way to college, still studying at the time, on the way to college and in social work studies. And I just realised that I couldn't cope with the day. It was too big, this thing that I thought I could just throw aside. And I thought I'll go and see my friend and realised she was at college as well. I thought, I'll go and see my sister. She was at college as well. The only place I had to go was my mum's, and I knew my mum would be in. And so I knocked on her door, and when she saw me, she was like, what are you doing here? You're meant to be at college. And she saw my face and she said, come in. And I went in, sat down. She made me a cup of tea. She asked me what it was about, and I told her what it was about. And she stood and held me and said, I am so sorry I wasn't there for you when you were a child.
Um,
She said, um, I don't remember all the things that happened, and I don't remember much about your time as a child, but I know I wasn't a good mum and I'm sorry. Now, she said that to me back when I was late 20s. In my age was late 20s. And that made a big difference. So when I say I'd tell her you're unforgiven, I was also a Christian at the time when I forgave her. But I wouldn't, I knew that she was sorry for the pain, even if she didn't remember the pain. And even if she did remember the pain, she couldn't bring herself to think about it. And
Yeah.
I knew she was sorry and she held me and said that. Now, I wouldn't want Ernest to hold me or come anywhere near me
Right.
from that point of view, but I would want the opportunity to say to him, right, this is what I remember. This is what you exposed me to and did to me as a child. What have you got to say about it? And just the being able to tell them how I felt, what that did, and then not if they weren't willing to say sorry, and sorry would be good, but if they weren't, that's fine. I just leave it there
Hmm.
because I've learned in therapy that that's where I want to, that's where it belongs.
Hmm.
And I don't have to see him to give it to him because I've done that mentally with Hillary, but I would like to still. So the kind of sense of, and I know real restorative justice is them coming back to you and acknowledging they're wrong, but there's a lot of power for me in that sense of being able to tell someone who wronged me what
Hmm.
I feel like, and people do it with their victim statements in courts, don't they?
Yeah.
And find it really helpful. Many
Mhm.
find it really helpful. I also feel that if we don't address the people that are causing the harm, then we're leaving other vulnerable people open to being harmed.
Yeah.
Um, and also, on the other end of the scale, is teaching our children about, people call it, there's some talk over here, I don't know if you've got it, there is red flag people and green flag people for
Okay.
children. And it explains, there's storybooks about them,
Hmm.
about red and green flag people. And so that if children feel at all, so the whole thing is around a feeling in your tummy when you're around someone, if something doesn't feel right, that's,
Teaching
you're picking
children to
something
pay
up. So maybe
attention.
they're a red flag person.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe they're a red flag person. And also about when children are reaching an age, and it can be very young, where they can wipe themselves after the toilet, where they don't need any assistance from an adult or a carer, a parent, is around teaching them as young as they can be to provide their own self-care in that way, but also talking to children about their bodies being theirs and it belongs to them, and that nobody has got the right to touch them, especially not in particular places, not even mummy and daddy. And that's what my children have taught their children,
Hmm.
not even mummy and daddy.
Hmm.
Like, so it's, there are extremes. One of my daughters said they're now talking about asking your baby if you can change their nappy
Uh,
when they're small and too young to understand. And I'm like,
maybe. You're
you,
covered
you
in
can,
poop. You need to be cleaned up. I'm not going to really ask about that. It's a service for us all.
I say, yeah, we have to do it. But I get the sentiment. Like if you are saying that to your child when they're pre-verbal and they're too small that you're normalizing the fact that
Mhm.
they have the right to say, you don't, no, I don't want you to touch me. I don't feel comfortable, or I don't like that feeling. It can be a yucky feeling, or it can be a cold feeling, or whatever it is, whatever's age appropriate. And one of my children's a director of safeguarding in social work, and she's
Wow.
done an awful lot of work with children with harmful behaviour as well as victims of
Hmm.
abuse. And she's also working now with known perpetrators.
Wow.
Um, so she's very well versed, and she's puts a lot of effort into that with her little girl who's nearly 3, because because we need, and I agree with her. I didn't know to do that with my children,
Mm.
but um, we do need to ensure in a safe and appropriate way that we educate our children about their bodies and their right not to be touched,
Yeah.
and about safe adults. And if they want to call that a green flag and a red flag, or a green adult, whatever, I don't care. They can call it what they like, but as long as the child understands what that means, And it's good if we have systems in place where it's known culturally that that is, that's what that means, whatever we adopt,
Hmm.
so that children know, and particularly in the UK, because we don't have mandatory reporting.
Really?
We don't have, yeah, we
Like
don't.
teachers,
They're in,
teachers are not mandatory reporters?
they're just starting to introduce something after the ICSA inquiry, the outcomes and recommendations from the National Inquiry into Historical Abuse into the institution. Yeah, that was institutions, and
Mm.
it focused on institutions like churches, schools, children's homes, things
Yeah.
like that. It didn't focus on the family. It
Mm.
didn't look at the family, but most abuse happens in the family.
Yeah.
So, but yes, they're just in. I don't even think it's properly through yet, but they are saying that they will agree for it to be implemented for professionals like teachers and nurses, people in
Wow.
a professional role. But
I can't
um,
believe that's not already like I just can't and in the UK, because it is a Western society, I cannot believe that that wouldn't because here in the United States, teachers, nurses, anyone in like law enforcement or emergency response, people who interact with children on a day-to-day basis, like they're all across the board considered mandatory reporters, and you can get into a lot of trouble if you are found to have not reported an issue that you knew about. So it's interesting to me and that goes, I think, again, goes to show just how much disparity there is across even like in like the so-called advanced Western civilization, like from the UK to the United States, and I'm sure in Canada, very, very different. And even like the language that is used is different.
yeah, I mean, there was 20 recommendations by the inquiry. It cost millions of pounds, and it was
Mhm.
over 7 years, and they're only just dealing with this one at the moment.
Wow.
And then they wanted to consult on it. And one of the problems with it is that not all survivor organisations agreed with the final recommendation as it was. Not so some survivor groups thought it should go further, some thought it should just be different. And so there was disparity. But for the government to have had an inquiry that was led by Alexis Jay and had legal status of a judge,
Hmm.
and then they want to consult on it again, rather than implement it. And okay, if you implement it, you run it for a couple of years, every single bit of legislation has got a few quirky bits in it that aren't quite right. And so you do an amendment.
Hmm.
So why couldn't they just do that? Because at the moment, our churches don't have to hand anything over if they don't want to. They can,
Hmm.
um, you know, they have to. The police will go and ask them for things, but if they haven't got to report on a mandatory basis, then they haven't got to tell the police about, oh, the next priest or the next vicar or the next curate or whoever he is, or
Yeah.
imam, whoever he is or she, they haven't got to tell on that person.
Hmm.
So, um, and the thing is about mandatory reporting, people are saying, oh, you're causing trouble for someone, but it's not for you to investigate. If you've got a suspicion because a child has said something to you, then let the professionals deal with it, because that's what they're there for. Your job is just to highlight it so that child is protected and safe. That's your job, is you highlight it. And then you don't have to do any more,
Hmm.
apart from maybe make a statement. Then the professionals will deal with it.
I think this all goes to show how this like the entire concept of protecting children or being trauma informed or all the things that we're talking about, providing resources for people, this is all so much still in its infancy, with like trying to get things coordinated and figured out. And it's all, I mean, it's the perfect time for anybody who cares about these things to get involved, because there's such a need for more people to be talking about these issues and raising these points and putting pressures on leadership and government to make changes. It's really going to take like a whole societal push. Like I had said earlier, it's not going to be a couple of groups of people doing all the hard work for us. It's really going to take everybody working together, to make any kind of
Mm.
change and to move the needle.
Yeah, and it's a hard slog.
It
because
is.
there's been organizations out there now for many years. I wasn't aware that the Women's Service had been around since now 25 years.
Hmm.
I wasn't aware of it until 2007.
Yeah.
The Tavistock and Portman has been working very hard since the late 70s, looking at psychological impacts within families and with children. you know, this isn't new. This has been going on for such a long time. And the reason that we are more united now is because of social media, and you can
Mhm.
see all the other organizations and the things that I post on social media in the survivor communities. I'm constantly saying, united we stand.
I mean, we have these organizations, like you say, this isn't a new thing, right? This isn't a new challenge that people have been contending with, but I think social media, the dawn of the internet, the hyperconnectivity that we all kind of suffer through now, it can be a double-edged sword because we suffer through it, but then by the same token, it can be used to cut through so much stigma and ignorance and just like lack of connectivity and access to resources. And so I think that it's a valuable tool that can be used to do good and to connect victims, survivors with resources and with the people who want to help them. And I really do believe that that's really how things are going to change. It's going to be like a grassroots type of thing where more and more people decide that they are tired of the systems that seem to serve a few and disregard and neglect the many, and that we're going to start doing things for ourselves. And I think you see this happening on a micro scale across the board, just with the number of people who have turned to independent lines of work that's enabled via the internet. They don't have to go and work for necessarily somebody in an office in a cubicle. People are redefining what it means to be a human being living in the world, moving through the world, redefining the terms and conditions under which we are living. And I think that this part of our conversation, our whole conversation here today, it ties into that and is part of a much broader societal push. But it's a slog, like you said, and it's going to take time. And I don't know if I'll see substantial change in my generation. But I think that if we can just keep being the light, um, I think that things will be better for future generations. I do believe that we can make a difference and an impact, and consecutively we'll have a snowball effect over time. That's my hope.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that I was going to say is that the marches and all of the hate that seems to be around, all
Yeah.
it's doing is dividing us, as it's dividing humanity. It's separating us. And if you look at the masses of people that are in an oppressed group, or on a lower income and aren't part of the elite, there's many more of us than there are of the elite. They're a tiny percentage of the world, let alone the UK.
Hmm.
So if we were to come out in strength with love and kindness, and it doesn't have to be biblical at
No.
all. I used to practice Christianity. I don't anymore, but I am a strong believer in love and kindness,
Mhm.
and um loving your fellow human, and not believing that, well, I'm all right, so you need to just get on with your life. I've had to fight hard for everything I've got. I absolutely have. But it doesn't mean that I want somebody else to be suffering just because I had to work so hard for it. And other people have had a much easier time, but there's an awful lot of people that haven't, and they're just trying to survive.
I think the feeling of helplessness and the feeling of powerlessness that comes on very quickly whenever you start to try to wrap your arms around these enormous issues, those feelings are the reasons why a lot of people don't get involved in this kind of thing or don't have want to have these conversations. But I think if you can remember and find your humanity and find the humanity in the other people around you, it transforms how you move through the world. And I kind of had a similar experience here within the last couple of weeks when we were in town getting groceries, doing our thing. And the day that we went to town was the day that Charlie Kirk was killed. And we started to see the fallout from all of that on social media really, really fast. And the anger and the vitriol that people were responding with was, I I shouldn't have been. I was shocked, but I wasn't surprised, I guess would be the way to look at it. But I was telling my husband that the experience of watching someone lose their life in front of thousands of people who did not deserve it, the impact that that had on me was that it made me want to soften. It made me want to reach out and show kindness to a person that I was passing on the street, a lady getting into her car, somebody walking, passing me in the grocery aisle or whatever. It made me want to like reestablish my connection with humanity. And I think that I'm
Mm.
able to have that perspective, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I'm able to have that perspective because I've done a lot of hard work myself. I've been through my own and still on my own healing journey and everything. And when you enter into that space and your heart begins to open, you never really, you remain ever changed after that. And you can never go back to kind of that locked down place that you were in before, where you were, not able to emote or trust your interactions with other people. I think again, we're talking about expressions of trauma and how trauma manifests. I'm able to move past that kind of thing and try to find the humanity. And I've seen a lot of people simply unable to do that. And I
Yeah.
think that says something significant about our society. And it's not the socio-political hot take that people think it is. It's something far more profound and far more human than that. And yeah, I think, you're talking about trying to make an impact the way that you can and fighting the feeling of overwhelm. And I think a lot about I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there's a story about a little boy who's on a beach and there's like a whole bunch of starfish that got washed up onto the beach. And he's walking along and he's throwing starfish back. And there's thousands, millions of these starfish. And a man comes along and he's like, what are you doing? Like, you're never gonna get all of these starfish back into the ocean. Like, it's just impossible. And the boys just like continuing to throw them back. And he's like, well, it made a difference to this one and this one and that
Love
one.
it.
And it's like, that's all that you can do is just keep throwing the starfish and focus on the one that's right in front of you, because that's all that there is, that's something you learn in mindfulness too. If you go down that path to focus on the here and the now, to be present in the moment and to be the light. And that's all that we can do. And I do think, like I said, we will move the needle. And your book is a guide. I really think it could be used as a guide for someone who's entering in their own healing journey, someone who wants to understand this landscape and this world better, wants to understand how trauma impacts people throughout their lives. I think that it's a valuable resource. And so I'm so happy that I found
Thank
out
you.
about it and got to read it, and that have been able to have this conversation with you, because this is, I think you're going to be the last interview that I do this year, by the way. And
Oh,
so I just think that this is the
okay.
perfect way to wrap up a year of really hard work, because we're closing the conversation out on a kind of a broad topic of trauma and healing, zooming out from the kind of very focused lenses that I shine on specific issues. And so I think
Yeah.
that's beautiful. And I'm just so grateful for this opportunity and so appreciative of you and your hard work.
Thank you. And to have this opportunity is wonderful, because when I began therapy, I never imagined that I would be doing something like this, having
Mm,
published a book about it and talking to you
yeah.
on a platform that's so public. Yeah, especially because my career in social work meant that I didn't talk about abuse in
Hmm.
childhood, because that's also a stigma in my career, in my profession that I was
Mm.
in. Um, but yeah, it's been a real honor and privilege to be spending time with you today. So I thank you for that, and for the opportunity to talk about my book. And Hilary and Maggie, both of whom will always have this massive place in my heart because of, just what them being willing to step out and do something for someone has meant to me.
I will be leaving your book link down below, which you recently re-released it with updated like imagery and everything. The initial release, the pictures were in black and white, and so you went through the effort of re-releasing it with color photos. And I don't have my copy yet, but I will leave that linked below for anyone who wants to purchase a copy. 10 out of 10 recommend. And I
Thank
will
you.
also leave, we exchanged, you sent me some resources about the ACE score and their site that with the resources and information they have on there. And you sent me some papers. So I'll be leaving all of that linked in the description of this interview for anyone who's interested in learning more and diving into this a bit more. Do you want to talk about your next literary
Next
venture?
book.
Yes, yeah. Can we talk about the
Yeah,
fact you have another book in the
yeah,
works?
yeah. So this is the second edition, and I published the first one in 2022.
Mm,
And because I wanted this to be a color version inside with the artwork as you and the photographs, and had a problem with my publisher, we weren't on the same page, we weren't in the same chapter, and we actually weren't in the same book. So it meant that with that and some changes that he made to contracts, it meant that it was an opportunity for me to point those things out to him and ask him for a reversion of rights, which meant I got my book back
yes.
before the 5 year contract. And then spent the next year making amendments, making some changes. And Joan Elliott, who I just want to give a shout out to, she's an absolutely amazing editor. She worked with me tirelessly to put the amendments in, self publish, and she taught me so much about how to do that because I wasn't going to go back to a publisher. I wanted to self-publish, and she knew how to do it. She's done 3 of her own already. And I could, because I was so busy with that book, I was unable to really get into my next book. And I've only written 16,000 words of it so far, and
Oh
it's
my.
likely to be a similar size. So I've got a lot of material to put into it. And it will be very similar to start with, talking about the intensity of therapy, but this is therapy with Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
Because after Hillary retired on health grounds, I saw Maggie privately. So I saw Hillary for the last few months privately, and then I saw Maggie privately, which was my request. There's a lot there because I felt that in the first book, I felt like Hillary raised me from that young child. And I
Yeah.
think I reached kind of adolescence with Hillary. And then I feel like when I then started seeing Maggie, I was in sort of adolescence and adulthood. So those two therapists have kind of nurtured me to this kind of mature, more
That's
together,
beautiful.
whole person that I am. And the next book definitely starts off with the journal, because I used a journal then as well, but it was less intense. So it's not going to be that really heavy, intense journaling type
Mm,
of therapy. There is some poetry and there will be some art in it, but I'll also be talking about the experience of being a professional living with trauma
mm,
and not really having anywhere to take that pain, because they talk about professionals experiencing secondary trauma,
yeah.
you know, if they, and police particularly and
Mm,
paramedics particularly, but professionals dealing with really heavy, difficult stuff can experience secondary trauma. Well, one thing that I have thought about a lot since retiring, actually, and having time to think, is around if you're living with trauma as a professional, dealing with things that are difficult on a daily basis, but you're living with your own trauma, how do you then cope with secondary trauma?
right.
And where's the trauma informed employer when the majority of people that go into the people services are people that have had a background of pain, and that's why they go into it? And so and I've done some training with the British Association of Social Workers around trauma informed employers
Mm,
and social workers living with their own trauma from childhood and then experiencing secondary trauma, and where's the support for them? And if you take the statistics from England about how many people in the UK have been abused in childhood, between 16 and 20%, there's 100,000 social workers registered in the UK to practice as social workers. So between 16 and 20,000 of those people are going to be people, at least
at
more,
least.
because that's where nurses, teachers, police, social workers, that's where we go. Therapists, that's where they go. And where's the support to stop them burning out and support them to continue working? And yeah, where is it? So there's all sorts of really kind of, the impact in adulthood, working through the impact in adulthood, coming to a place now where I kind of am able to get gobby and talk more about things in an informed and self-aware way that I feel incredibly passionate about. And those things are going to be, and some of it's already in there, but it's only 16,000 words, so it's just early days. But yeah, so I hope in about a year or so, the second book will be ready and I will be self-publishing.
I'm very excited about it. I
Thank
can't
you.
wait. I think that's really good news. Just because from reading your story, it's clear that there's more to say. You have more to say on the subject after reading your first book and everything. It was the conclusion of that chapter. That 6 years, was a chapter of your healing journey. Um, and to read the next chapter of it, I'm very excited about that, and I know that that's going to have a positive impact on a lot of people, just as your first book has, and I'm sure will continue to. So,
Thank you.
if anyone is at all interested in keeping up with your work or anything like that, is there anywhere they can connect with you or follow you?
Yes. So if they look for Patricia M Wennell on any social media platform, they'll find me. And the book has got all my addresses in it
Okay.
inside so that I can be contacted. And if somebody reaches out to you with a specific thing that feels like really pressing, you can get in touch with me and maybe put us in touch with each other.
Okay.
Because sometimes there's something that powerful that you think
Yeah,
this, and if that happens, because when we talk about things like this, it moves people and
it
it can
does.
be difficult. And in the back of the book, in this second edition, there's quite a few books that are really helpful and some survivor-led organisations. One of which is American, and one's in the UK, but it's also in Australia, Philippines, and India. So there's some information there for people to
Wonderful.
make contact.
Wonderful. Okay, awesome.
Oh, can I just say that Survivors Voices is the organisation, the community that I'm very involved in. And Survivors Voices, they work with and support people with any background of abuse, whether child or adult, could be anything, domestic violence included, anything, and which is unusual.
Hmm.
Um, and they're a great organisation. They're also listed in the book, and they offer peer support, creative writing, campaigning, change making, and research. They're a
Wow.
fantastic organisation, and they're a group of people that have made a huge difference to me in terms of feeling post therapy, not feeling isolated.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
sorry, forgot to tell you about them.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful addition. I'll link some of these organizations and things down below as well. And if anyone is listening to this and has been moved by your story and everything, and they're feeling compelled to start unpacking their own trauma, maybe they haven't started on that journey yet. Do you have any words of wisdom for somebody who's maybe just starting out in that process?
Yeah, I'd say anybody who is starting to reach out for that kind of support, that the first therapist they come across, if it's not working for them, it doesn't mean it's them. It just means that we don't all connect, as you said earlier, we don't all connect with the same people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, them feeling safe and comfortable with someone and checking out that that person is not just trauma informed, trauma responsive, trauma sensitive, that they're appropriately qualified and experienced in working with whatever their pain is. Also, what I did when I was paying for mine is I budgeted for it to make sure that I could afford it for several years because I didn't know how much longer I would need it for. And having had therapy over 6 years, I knew I could possibly need to continue. So finding a budget for it or thinking about how they can ensure that they're not going to end up having to stop it through financial reasons because that would be terrible, I think. And then carving out time for themselves so that before therapy and after therapy, and some time and space that's just for them. And if they're people that like to express themselves in painting, art, or the written word, could be gardening, it could be anything, doesn't matter what it is, anything that they really love to do that helps them to feel connected to themselves and good about themselves, that carve out some time every week, a bit like with the mindfulness stuff you were talking about, but make sure they've got that space for them. I didn't have my therapy until my children were adults because I just sensed, even though I didn't have a clue how much time I would spend in therapy, I kind of sensed that this was going to be big.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't have the opportunity to fully have therapy before that, but I wouldn't have done before. So I think if you have got a family and you're a really busy person, a mum or dad, or just are very busy, think about how you can carve that time out for yourself to give yourself that permission to just rest and be kind to you, because that is just so important. And as people start to feel a greater sense of self-worth and a greater sense of self-esteem and entitlement, I like to say,
Mm-hmm.
feel entitled, that space will probably, the desire to create that space will come naturally. But leading up to that, I think it can feel like I did feel selfish, felt like, oh, why is someone, why should I have all this help and support and this time for me when other people need me? It's like, no, you are the most important person. And therapy is hard work. It's a huge commitment, but I would do it all over again to get to where I am.
Well, thank you so much for giving me a couple of hours of your time and for sharing your story and everything so candidly. This has been just an absolute privilege. So I am very appreciative.
Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode or found it informative or helpful in any way, please consider subscribing if you haven't already and sharing this video with someone that you know. Another huge thank you to Patricia for so generously sharing her time with me and for her hard work in the space of social work, child advocacy, and mental health care reform. I know that I am a better person for having had this conversation, and I hope that you feel the same way after having heard it. To read some more of Patricia's work and learn more about the resources that are being offered for adult survivors of childhood abuse, I've linked everything in the description of this episode. Obviously, this also includes a link where you can purchase her book because it didn't stop when it ended. Please consider picking up a copy online or from your bookseller of choice. Friends, it has been an absolutely stellar year. I am so pleased to be able to do this work, and the past year has been such a big year for the Deep Dive Project. Thank you to each and every person who showed up, subscribed, sent me messages, and supported my work. A very, very special thank you to my research consulting clients, the dozens of people who bought me coffees or sent me support here on YouTube or became paying subscribers of my Substack, Beck, Griffin, and the Deep Dive Project. I am just blown away by your generosity and by the trust that you have placed in my abilities, and I need you to know that I'm not taking any of it lightly. 2025 was the Deep Dive Project's proving grounds, and I am very happy with the results. Let's make 2026 the year that puts all of the change and reform that we have discussed over the past year into practice. I think the future looks bright. Now, because of the heaviness of the topics that I focus on, I want to make sure and remind everyone listening that if you or someone that you know needs mental health support, I always link a variety of resources down in the description of every episode. Life is hard, but we do not need to go at it unequipped or alone. If you need help, please reach out. Also, remember that details to learn more about my work, connect with me on social media, and support my endeavors are all linked down below. If you like to read, consider checking out my Substack. I just mentioned it, Beck Griffin and the Deep Dive Project, where I have been publishing shorter articles inspired by my work and research. Also, don't forget that in addition to YouTube, you can find the Deep Dive Project on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Rumble, and basically anywhere podcasts live. If you listen there, please be sure to leave a rating or a review or a comment because it helps the Deep Dive Project reach more people. And if you feel like hanging around, go and check out some of the other playlists and content on the community tab over on my channel. Thank you for being here. I hope that you had a very, very Merry Christmas. I hope that you have a very Happy New Year. And remember, no lite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.